Hey everybody, Andrea Emmes here, and welcome to Voices of Calm. This is where we like to read little excerpts from public domain stories, literary that is out now with the permission from the authors and publishers, of course, and hopefully we can bring a little joy to our world for just a small little moment by escaping into some amazing stories. Speaking of amazing, so the book I'm going to read a sample from right now is by best-selling author Jack Castle. Thank you for permission. Um, it's the prequel to his Stranger World series, and it's called, let's see if I can get the, without glare, Stranger Origins. There we go. By Jack Castle, best-selling author. And it's a sci-fi fantasy. It's futuristic theme park that is basically dominating civilization, which is very dependent on technology and entertainment. It's like what would happen if you had Disney World meets Westworld, I guess, maybe. So here's a sample for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Prologue. Lisa Burton. Would you please hold still? I will not. You don't want me to carve your face off by accident, do you? Senior hologram engineer Lisa Burton activated her hydrostatic scalpel once more and resumed recrafting the nose of her most favored creation. Just as the blade was about to reach its target, her subject abruptly turned her face to the side, for the 5th time. Lisa sighed and switched off the scalpel. Removing her safety glasses, she asked, "Now what?" In a crisp British accent, she replied matter-of-factly, "I dare say I quite like my nose right the way it is." Lisa hopped down from her high stool and said, "Well, there's been some, Lisa coughed into her fist. "Complaints." The woman before her wore black knee-high boots, off-white trousers, and a navy blue nautical jacket. A black leather pistol belt with spare pouches ensnared her narrow waist. The taller woman arched a high eyebrow down at her and asked cynically, with only the slightest hint of curiosity, "Complaints, you say? What sort of complaints?" Not sure exactly how to respond, Lisa settled for saying, "The guests say that you think you're better than them." Her subject adjusted her naval coat slightly. "I am a lieutenant in Her Majesty's Navy, and second in command of Her Majesty's airship, Dauntless. So, one would think that those snivelling puerile infants would mind their betters, and be grateful every time I bring them back in one piece from another harrowing expedition." She thought about this some more. "Furthermore, I fail to see what any of that nonsense has to do with the shape of my nose." Lisa knew she could have easily shut down the lieutenant's programming to perform the cosmetic surgery. But in truth, she quite liked these little bouts of banter with the lieutenant. In fact, if an outside observer didn't know she was a hologram, they might even say the two of them were best friends. Without warning, a man with a contentious mound of bright orange hair and a face with more freckles than skin popped up from behind the partition wall and announced, "Hey, Nerdosaurus Rex, the boss's boss wants to see you." The Carrot Top's name was Cliff Munson, or, as the Gene Slicers down on 7th called him, Cliff Munchin. The latter was usually the more accurate of the two, as Cliff's dumpy frame was hardly undersized, and he was always eating potato chips or some other vending machine-related snack. Normally, Lisa's work and rank afforded her a minimum of no less than 3 floors, but due to last month's attacks, she had been forced to share her office space with some of the other designers and creationeers. If that wasn't bad enough, Cliff Munson was easily her least favorite coworker. Like most things in Stranger World, Cliff was a perfect dichotomy, in that his work was as brilliant as his lab was an untidy dung heap. He had several degrees from MIT, but he gave off the impression of a slovenly dimwit trapped inside the body of an overweight man nearing 40. Cliff had an almost childlike enthusiasm, yet also an incredible mean streak. He was like the neighbor's kid who liked to fry ants under a magnifying glass, all the while laughing about it. Still, why would corporate want to see me? She wondered. Typically, when a creationeer was called upstairs, it was for a swift termination. What could I have possibly done? She realized Cliff was still watching her with a bemused look upon his face. Refusing to let him see her sweat, but failing to keep her voice from wavering, she asked, "Do you know what they want?" Cliff must have picked up on her nonverbal cue, because he appeared more tickled than ever when he answered, "Dunno, lab rat. They didn't say." Numbly, Lisa nodded. "Okay, thanks." Cliff was always calling her names like that. Bookworm, lab rat, vampira. Unfortunately, most of them were fairly accurate. She almost never saw the sun, usually arrived at work long before everyone else, and left long after the sun went down. Also, she had taken her current employment straight out of college 8 years ago. The JOB was so demanding, she rarely had time for a social life. Cliff shuffled around the partition dividing their workstations in his ridiculous foam slippers. "I don't know what you did, but it must be pretty bad for you to get called upstairs." Munch, munch, munch. As usual, Cliff was loudly snacking away and leaving behind enough crumbs to fill a pastry shop. Deep down, what she wanted to say was, "Hey, Cliff, in case you can't read the kabazillion signs, this entire floor is clearly designated as a clean and sterilized area. So, here's an idea. What do you say? Now and forever, you leave your germy crumbs out of the tissue sequencer." But because she had worked with Cliff long enough to know that it would only be a wasted breath, she chose to avoid confrontation and settled for saying, "Okay, Cliff, thanks for letting me know." The lieutenant would have socked him a good one, she thought, and even now the lieutenant was arching an eyebrow toward her, as if to ask why she wasn't doing that very thing. Lisa whispered to her creation in reproach, "Not you too." The lieutenant straightened her nautical coat with a firm, swift tug, stuck her untouched nose into the air, and responded in equal volume. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't say so much as a word." Munch, crunch, munch. Cliff swallowed noisily, nearly choking, and said, "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you something." "Oh, goody. Look who's still here." The lieutenant managed to communicate to her with only the merest of glances. Cliff must have missed it, for he asked, "Why lieutenant? That doesn't even make sense." As Lisa returned the scalpel to its proper place, along with all the other tools in her tool tray, lined up at precise right angles, she fought down a sigh and explained, "The word lieutenant is an archaic spelling of lieutenant, which is actually derived from the Latin words locatimnes." Sorry, I'm not sure if I said that right. Which literally translated, it means taking the place of. Munch, munch, crunch. "Yeah, if that's the case, then how come that's not the way we spell it now?" As Lisa removed her gloves and disposed of them properly, she replied, "The only reason we spell it wrong is Charles Merriam and Noah Webster, of Merriam and Webster Dictionary. They chose the spelling that sounded more correct over the actual original French word." "Oh, all right," Cliff said, and continued munching away like a dim-witted dolt. Thinking about the VP waiting for her, she began switching off her workstation and thought, "I really don't have time for this." Tossing his reddish curls toward the lieutenant, Cliff asked, "So how come she looks like you?" This was preposterous, of course. Lisa was well aware of how many creationeers would build biologicals in their own image, but Lisa refused to stoop down to such narcissistic levels. Firing back, she said, "What are you talking about? She doesn't look a thing like me." Cliff was about to inhale another chip, froze, smiled, and said, "Sure she does. She might be a little taller, a bit thinner, have perfect skin and corn silk hair, but in the end, she's still you." Cliff was being absurd, and judging by the lieutenant's face, she thought so too. The lieutenant was 5'7", while she was a mere 5'3". The lieutenant had long silky fibers of serene yellow hair, whereas hers was an ordinary dirty blonde. Lisa smiled politely and rose from her chair. "You're being ridiculous." Cliff inhaled another handful of chips and laughed, spewing crumbs everywhere. "Whatever you say, labradoodle." He brushed the crumbs off his hoodie and onto the floor. Disappearing around the cubicle wall, she saw he left behind another trail of crumbs in his wake. "Ugh, Where's my mini-vac? Realizing she didn't have time to clean up after Cliff now, she finished powering down her lab. After verifying that she had saved her work, Lisa turned off her primary monitor, and on cue, the lieutenant also vanished. She was about to leave her station entirely when she noticed a framed black and white photograph hanging on her wall that was slightly out of place. The photo depicted the famous jungle explorer and distant ancestor, thank you very much, Sir Richard Francis Burton. Sir Richard Francis had been a member of Britain's prestigious Royal Geographical Society. He had spoken no less than 29 languages and was predominantly known for exploring Asia, Africa, and the Americas in the mid-19th century. Straightening out the tiled photo with one forefinger, Lisa glanced below the frame at the antique knife displayed in a handsome glass case. The dull silver blade was about the size and length of a common English carving knife. It had a cylindrical brown wooden handle with a metal crossguard to protect the user's hand. "Better shake a leg, lab monkey," came Cliff's disembodied voice from his workstation. "Hell hath no fury like a VP kept waiting." As much as she hated to admit it, Cliff was right. She needed to get moving. It wasn't every day a senior manager wanted to have a little chat. Passing Cliff's workstation on her way out, she noticed he was performing another touch-up on one of the Fairy Maze monarchs. "Hey, didn't you just give that model a refresh last week?" Cliff snorted. "Yeah, I did, but her ladyship here thought she could use a little touch-up. Can you imagine that? She actually found her way down here, and when security nabbed her on 12, she demanded a—" He changed his accent to a haughty woman with a Scottish accent. "Bit o' sprucing up post-haste." Lisa studied the monarch sitting there poised and holding up one of those creepy porcelain masks at the end of a thin rod. The analytics in Lisa's bioptics displayed the biological's designator in floating white letters over her head. Lady Wellington. The way Cliff was always fawning over her ladyship, he might as well have been her personal manservant. Still, Lisa was hardly surprised by her ladyship's behavior. Lady Wellington was a top-of-the-line TK-12 series, and by design, she was programmed to be as narcissistic as she was cunning. "Yep, Lady Wellington is a wagon load of mischief-makers," she managed. "See, Lucifer, I can mix it up," she thought inwardly. Lucifer was Lisa's cat. He was so named for two reasons. The first being, he seemed to go out of his way to make her life a living torment, peeing on, and subsequently killing, all of her plants, shredding the curtains, scratching up the sofa, and anything else he could get his wrathful claws into. The second reason Lucifer was named so was because he didn't even like her, only allowing himself to be petted on the rarest of occasions. Snapping her out of her daydream, Cliff complained, "They say it won't be long before these things are ruling the world. I say they're practically doing it right now." At this, Lady Wellington's eyes opened abruptly, flicked over Cliff for a moment, as though processing what he had just said, and then, realizing she was being watched, immediately screwed them shut tight again. Cliff, busy with his paints, had been none the wiser. Seeing her ladyship's behavior, Lisa thought, that was kind of weird. Of course, she had bigger things to worry about than an eavesdropping biological. Maybe I'll do a diagnostic on her learning behavior program when I get back. I don't know what I'm getting so worked up about. It's literally impossible for a biological to kill another human being. Lisa was about to ponder the incident further, until she realized she had no idea where she was going. The VP responsible for overseeing her work was well known for almost never being in his office. "Do you happen to know where he is?" Cliff smiled. It didn't look good on him, more like a dopey grin on an evil yellow-toothed chimp. "I dunno. He didn't say. The usual place, I suspect." Why'd I even bother asking? She tapped the control device placed inside the bracelet on her wrist. A map of all the parklands soon disappeared in front of her. Of course, no one other than the wearer of her glasses could see the translucent map hovering before her. "Show me Mark McCormick." The ear implant in her ear commanded, "Please specify title." Lisa pursed her lips. This automated request was obviously something Mark had programmed himself. He had been recently promoted to VP, and no one could locate him by his name unless they specified his new title first. Please locate Senior Vice President Mark McCormick. Even before she completed her sentence, a flashing yellow star appeared on the map. Of course, he'd be there. As she departed, Cliff sang, "Good luck, Burton," leaving Cliff and his eavesdropping ladyship behind. Lisa took the L-tube beneath several lands, including Arctic adventures, the town of Havenport, and the zombie apocalypse. While traveling on the train, never once did she gaze up from her holographic datapad and notice any of the other passengers around her. The interior of the tube car could have been filled to the brim or totally empty, and she would have never been the wiser. If the other passengers could see her holographic schematic, which they couldn't, they would see why she was busy working on They would see she was busy working on integrating the lieutenant into the newly upgraded ship. They would see she was busy working on Oh my gosh, so sorry. Here we go. They would see she was busy working on They would see she was busy working on integrating the lieutenant into the newly upgraded airship, the Dauntless. Without actually hearing the stop announcement, she automatically departed the tube car and headed for the elevators, which would take her topside. She would have preferred to take the tunnels all the way up to Mark's location, but after last week's terroristic attack, a large section of subfloors was still under repair. So she had to cross through at least some of the park and navigate through throngs of park guests. Glancing up from her holographic display, with only merest of glances, she reached the elevator just in time to see it enclose a bunch of suits inside. Before the elevator doors closed completely, a slender man out in front, who liked to give his hair a little flip over to one side, mouthed the word, "Sorry." "Thanks a lot, pal," she grumped aloud. Spotting a stairwell nearby, she ascended it, in heels no less, and lightly pushed on the crash bar that would transport her to the outside world. The blinding daylight outside washed over her, melting her eyes out of their sockets, and consumed her human flesh right down to her very soul. Cliff's right. I really do need to get out more. Whew, and that's the end of the prologue. Sorry about the mistakes. Sometimes it happens. This is a super fun book, and I think I might later do a video of Chapter 1, which is called Welcome to Atlantis. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Please stay safe, be well, stay vigilant, and blessings to you.